Namaskar. After the Paris terror attacks on Friday, the French warplanes carried out 128 fresh raids overnight against Islamic State's stronghold of Raqqa in northern Syria, destroying a command center and training center. The French President François Hollande has, on Monday, in fact, he had vowed to adopt hardline security powers, reassuring the French people of his determination to wipe out the enemy. In his address to both houses of parliament, Hollande had said a comprehensive overhaul of the country's security policies at home and abroad would require changes to the constitution.
French president has announced that France is at war following the attacks in Paris on Friday. Speaking at Versailles in a rare meeting with both houses of parliament, President François Hollande announced that France will extend the state of emergency by 3 months. He added that the French constitution must be adapted for crisis situations such as the atrocity on Friday.
I honestly believe that we need to update our constitution to allow the authorities to act within the law against terrorism. Stripping someone of their nationality should not render someone stateless, but we should be able to remove someone's French nationality from someone found guilty of a violation of our nation's fundamental interests or an act of terror, even if this person was born French.
French security officials have zeroed in on Abdelhamid Ahmad, a 27 or 28-year-old Belgian-born ISIL fighter, as the suspected mastermind of the Paris attacks. Ahmad traveled from Belgium to Syria to join the Islamic State in 2013 or 2014 perhaps, and has since been linked to a number of terror attacks and plots, including an assault on a high-speed train in August. French police also identified 2 more Paris attackers, including a Syrian and a Frenchman who was previously charged in a terrorist case. Earlier, a total of 23 people were arrested, 104 put under house arrest, and dozens of weapons seized in more than 168 raids on suspected Islamist militants across France. Meanwhile, Paris came to a silent standstill on Monday as people gathered for a minute's silence at landmarks and the sites of Friday's attacks to remember the victims and their families. Commuters gathered together for a minute's vigil in metro stations as trains were held at the platform for the full minute. Tourists stood in silence at the Eiffel Tower. Besides, special prayers were also held across the globe to remember the victims. Bureau Report, TT News.
Well, US President Barack Obama had said on Monday that his strategy for defeating Islamic State is working despite last week's horrific attacks in Paris, forcefully rejecting calls for escalating the use of military force in the Middle East or turning away Syrian refugees at home. Now, in a news conference in Antalya, the U.S. president had said that airstrikes by the U.S.-led coalition have been effective in taking out key members of the terror group's leadership, and that a large presence of ground troops in Syria would be a mistake.
The people who are fleeing Syria are the most harmed by terrorism. They are the most vulnerable as a consequence of civil war and strife. They are parents, they are children, they are orphans, and it is very important, and I was glad to see that this was affirmed again and again by the G20, that we do not close our hearts to these victims of such violence and somehow start equating the issue of refugees with the issue of terrorism.
Well, to discuss the airstrikes on ISIS assets, we have with us in the studio Air Marshal Padamjit Singh Ahluwalia, retired, former Commander-in-Chief of the Western Air Command. Dilip Sinha is a former senior diplomat, Ambassador of India, former permanent representative of India to the United Nations at Geneva. And Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti is a former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. We'll start with you, Air Marshal Ahluwalia. Airstrikes, easy way of dealing with the enemy. No, but it's a sort of like remote control. No casualties to you, but heaps of civilian casualties could result.
Yes, the big question which has been debated for quite some time is whether these kind of precision strikes for non-conventional targets, like in this case the IS, will have its impact. I think that is very difficult for them to have any impact whatsoever. And notwithstanding what the Americans feel, that there has been definite positive effect on the IS by carrying out strikes against the IS.
Yes.
There hasn't been any improvement. They have occupied more territory. They are getting more people involved. So therefore, because it is not targets which are conventional, these are targets that are highly mobile. There are fluid. There are human beings which are moving from one place to the other. They're embedded in the local habitation. They're embedded within the population. They are within the mosques. They are within the madrasas, that's the schools. So it's very difficult to actually hit them or have any, like you might say, shock and awe effect, or even have any lethality, because there are no tanks over there.
Okay.
There are no artillery or anything like that. So
Sure.
it is a big question, and I think it's very debatable at this point whether airstrikes are effective or not,
Okay.
compared to boots on the ground.
But Ambassador Sinha, the Islamic State is already a state within a state. It's operating assets that are like a state. It has territory. It has oil rigs. It has means to earn its own income. It's there are all these artifacts at Palmyra. They're breaking them down and selling them for millions of dollars. They have there is some way, one can actually target them because they have a large area of land. So airstrikes are possible, is what I'm saying.
Well, airstrikes are certainly possible. The question is, how effective are they? Experience shows that airstrikes have never been effective against terror groups. Terror groups, as Air Marshal said, just vanish into the civilian populations. And when bombings take place, terrorists are the first people to flee, leaving civilians behind. And it's civilians who are the main casualties of these airstrikes. We have seen these airstrikes. Airstrikes have been taking place for the last over a year now in Syria.
Okay.
And the IS is anything but weakened by it.
Ambassador Chakravarti, then what can one do? I mean, we've seen after the Paris terror attacks that the whole world stands united with the French, but nobody is willing to put boots on the ground, and France has declared war, and they are resorting to airstrikes. Maybe they will go and put boots on the ground, but they are resorting to airstrikes, which is the easiest way. And when people look at a war conventionally, they believe air power is the superior force.
Well, air power can only do so much. I mean, they can soften them up. But let me say that over the past 1 year, there have been airstrikes going on by the Americans, by others. What has happened?
They retaliated. That's right.
The IS has not been subdued. They have gained more territory. They have increased their influence. One of the reasons is that because the IS was seen as one of the pawns in toppling President Assad.
Okay.
So there are conflicting objectives in Syria by different parties. And that is what has led to this kind of a civil war and the problem.
Mm-hmm.
There you have Russia, which has now intervened, which will certainly want Assad to remain. So ultimately, as India has said, that we need a political solution.
Right.
That all the parties must be brought to the table to discuss a political solution. And meanwhile, of course, if the IS needs to be bludgeoned into submission, so be it.
Right. Ambassador Sinha, how can the IS be bludgeoned into submission?
Well, I think this is the battle that has been fought in the hearts and minds of people.
Okay.
It can't be bombed out of existence. We have seen that happening in bombing only encourages more terrorism.
You
We've
can't
seen that
bomb an ideology.
Yes, you've seen it in Iraq, you've seen it
Okay.
in Libya, you've seen it in Afghanistan. It is extremely difficult to bomb terrorists out of shape. You'll end up killing only civilians.
So, Air Marshal Ahluwalia, what actually happens appears to be that, sleeper cells in all other countries, they get awakened by these sort of attacks. There's an alienation of the community, which also adds, with an alienation of Muslims. There's recruiting targets for ISIS. So as Ambassador Sinha was saying, that this is a fight to win the minds of people. And when you target, there's military action, what happens is that you're further alienating the group, which can actually cause greater recruitment for ISIS. So as a military man, how would you view this?
Undoubtedly, in cases like this, which is not conventional warfare, you are dealing with these human beings who are sifting in and out of habitations. Collateral damage that occurs creates much more impact in the minds of those who are not involved or influenced by people like the IS. They will get influenced, and in the long run, it's going to have a detrimental or a negative impact rather than a positive impact. Yes, air power can be used effectively. However, air power will have to be very selectively used. In the case, for instance, when you have the IS in Iraq, the question of them getting the oil north of Tikrit and the oil fields over there, and then selling this oil and getting money, I am sure there will be methodologies to identify this and to make sure that you hit these oil targets wherein the oil cannot be exported out of the country. Similarly, the logistics supply, similarly the weapons. But then, just like the ambassador said, the secretary said, that it's very important to have a political solution. You find Russia is helping now Syria, and France did not come for airstrikes within Syria because they didn't want Assad to get the upper hand. So they were only helping in the coalition in Iraq. So the political forces, especially in the Western world, have to come together. Yes, national interest is very important, but each country having their own interest, which is predominant, you will never ever get a solution to the problem.
Ambassador Chakravarti, okay, so ISIS has a core, which is Iraq and Syria, and then around that they probably have some sort of support, the refugees moving out, also groups which are sympathetic to them moving out and creating their own areas. And then there is also, because they are trading with these groups initially, earlier, which are around the core, they are creating a sort of a state, isn't it? And how does one break this? Because over a period of time, they are developing relations, and they have sympathizers, and you know, at the end of the day, the parties that are involved in this war are far away, and they are involved because you know, they have been hit by terrorist targets.
The IS is not a classical state. They are holding on to territory by force, and I don't think all the civilian population there is giving them a lot of support. I think many of the minorities, for example, the Yazidis and others who've been butchered by these people, are certainly not supporting them.
So those are the ones running away, and they're all entering Europe.
The Kurdish people are fighting them, all the Kurdish people. So I don't think the IS enjoys a widespread support upon the civilian population. Not widespread, but yes, there will be some amount of support, and mainly the Sunnis, because it is a sectarian outfit, there is no doubt about it. Because the caliphate that they announced is basically a Sunni state, kind of orthodoxy, and the Sunni project.
In fact, they even target the Hezbollah because they are Shia.
Absolutely, because the Shia. Now the thing is that what has been happening, and I go back to this point, that Syria would not have reached this kind of a disaster if those who had tried to initiate this project of regime change had desisted in the beginning. Now it is the same mistake that has been repeated in Iraq, in Libya, and now in Syria. Because of geopolitical and other interests, they wanted Assad to be removed, and that is what led to the support even for groups like Al-Qaeda, because this ISIS really begins in Iraq. The Al-Qaeda in Iraq, it comes out of that. So I think this kind of wrong and muddle-headed policies that has been followed in this region by some of the big powers, and this is a kind of a blowback.
Okay. Ambassador Sinha, because what has actually, I mean, until this attack in Paris, the US and Russia didn't see eye to eye on the policy against ISIS, because, well, the US thought that Russia was targeting anti-Assad groups, which were actually being supported by the Western powers. And now they seem to have got together, and now even Russia says that, I mean, even France is asking for help from both Russia as well as the US in this fight. So do you see a coalition developing, which is going to a military coalition?
Well, they are trying to develop one. They'll have their differences, but it's important to remember that this coalition has bypassed the UN, and so the international process itself has a question mark on it. European powers have a colonial past, and that's not been forgotten, not in Syria certainly. there is a history to
Yes.
to the colonial exploitation of Syria even in the past. So it's important that the UN be involved in this process rather than individual countries forming coalitions and taking action. Just as the IS doesn't recognize either national or international processes, the international community also must recognize international processes, which is recognizing the UN and its role in this process rather than taking on the role individually by countries.
But what is the international role, Ambassador Sinha? Because all countries, most leaders have, in their sound bites, they have said very clearly that they, stand shoulder to shoulder. They express solidarity with what has happened. What does that translate to, actually? What kind of action can that translate to?
Well, there is no authority by the UN Security Council for bombing Syria. There is no credible UN process right now taking place in Syria to bring the various parties together. What you have are individual countries with their individual interests.
Okay.
Now, at times they conflict each other. And so there are accusations and counter allegations. You said that the IS is a state and is making money through the sale of oil. Now,
State within a state is
yes.
what I said.
So somebody has to be buying that oil.
Yes.
So obviously somebody is paying money to the
They even
IS.
have their own coins, apparently.
Exactly. So now the point is that the international community has to come together and say that they have got to put sanctions on IS. Now this is possible when there is a coalition through the UN, that the UN itself takes action on this, rather than individual countries, which can then get, there will be differences of opinion among various countries, and each country will go its own way and then make counter allegations.
Air Marshal Ahluwalia, why is the world, or at least the world powers which are involved in this war currently, why do they believe that air power is the way forward? And they have been using drones earlier. Precision targeting is possible, even with this kind of technology that is available to us today. We saw some of those planes there, it's all being videographed, in fact, their precision shots.
See, precision strikes definitely are very effective. The question is, what is your target? The question is, where is the hard intelligence that they need? The question is, these command and control centers, they don't exist. They're using very, basic telecommunication systems. And within the hour, they'll change from one place to another. There are no fixed targets. And therefore, hard intelligence in real time is necessary to eliminate, you can say, the highest levels of these organizations.
Okay.
So therefore, having precision, having technology, but not having real-time hard intelligence through technological means or through boots on the ground or intelligence agents on the ground, it will never be effective. The next point I want to make is that it is always, the extra-regional powers that come into a region and create, this inflammation, if you might call it.
Okay.
It is history now, whether it be Vietnam, whether it be Afghanistan, the Middle East. I can tell you, Iraq was a country, yes, that was run by Saddam Hussein, undoubtedly, but they didn't have any chemical weapons. There was no need for you to go inside there. Yes, they did attack Kuwait. There are reasons. But if you had left Iraq to itself, you wouldn't be losing hundreds of people today. Because when Saddam Hussein was there, there was some discipline. There was no, known causes for them to have any kind of problems between the Shias and the Sunnis, which is very, very existent now.
Right. Ambassador Chakrabarti, the US in this latest video that ISIS has released is going to be the target. That's what they say. They say that any country that is supporting strikes against ISIS will be targeted. So the US, has been involved with airstrikes against ISIS for more than a year now. But they have been able to keep their house in order. But then they are worried now about all these refugees coming in, and many governors have taken decisions against that. And then that was the soundbite we heard of President Obama saying that is not a good thing. But in a situation like this, how does a country like the US act? Because, there is an open threat. The president is talking one language, the governors are talking another language.
It's very clear that there will be a backlash against the refugees. It's also very clear that the border controls will be tightened, and everybody with a name which sounds like, Arab or something will be targeted and all kinds of controls will be put.
Right.
So there will be a lot of paranoia, and I think you're already seeing that in Washington, because if you read the media, there were some incidents, and so everybody went into panic mode, etc., and all that. So it's going to happen, and the IS is actually conducting a psychological operation here, and threatening that we will attack. So everybody is now in a slight amount of paranoia. Where is the
Sure.
next gunman is going to appear and shoot up people on the streets or in a hotel
Right.
or anywhere else? So
Right.
there will be this paranoia. It will of course dissipate after some time when
Okay.
when nothing happens. But then it could happen any time, and that is the moment that it might happen, because immediately things may not happen, because then people are already alert.
Sure.
They are looking for these things to happen. But I am sure that something like that will happen, because as we have been discussing, it's the war on terror, or these kind of terrorists are there in every society. Okay. And they can be activated, or they can be motivated, and they can be energized into conducting some of these operations.
Ambassador Sinha, there has been there are lots of raids within Paris, within France, and perhaps in Belgium that have been going on, targeting groups of people who are sympathetic to ISIS. And that's because of surveillance has gone on for a long time on these people. But now that emergency powers have been taken up by the state can just go in and do what they want with all these people. And we see that they've been pretty hard on people. Is this going to create some sort of a backlash, considering that there's quite a sizable number of minority people in France for one, in other areas of Europe?
Unfortunately, yes. While such raids and such action is inevitable, the state has to take action, has to protect the security of its citizens. Unfortunately, experience shows that there are excesses, and the result is that the community is driven away into the fold of the extremists.
Okay.
And that is the most dangerous thing to happen, where a community feels alienated from the mainstream, and therefore it becomes easy pickings for the extremists.
And ISIS is exploiting that. In fact, all their videos
yes,
seem to exploit that very clearly.
Yes, this is one of the most difficult things that a state is challenged with, both all over the world.
And what about India, sir?
Well, here also, when the security forces move in any place
No, I'm talking about the threat because of these incidents, maybe a backlash within India itself, an alien nation.
I don't think IS has much of a following in India. India is fortunately removed from that. There have been a few instances, but these are really exceptions. I don't think that's much of a threat to India. This is essentially an Arab phenomenon. It's happened because of the sectarian divide that has taken place there, and the interventions, foreign interventions.
Air Marshal Ahluwalia, you wanted to comment on that, yes?
You see, the IS has got influence now all over the world, literally. I mean, their influence right from North Africa to the Middle East, not forgetting that Pakistan is providing a huge amount of manpower for the IS today.
Okay.
So therefore, the minority community, if I might call it, in our country, consists of 15% of the total population.
Okay.
And that's a very large number. So I think it will not be proper for us to think that our minority community in the long run will not get affected, in the sense that there will be a very minor amount, but a very minutest amount,
Sure.
but there will be elements within our country also
Sure.
would get influenced, and therefore it would be very essential
Sure.
that we take note of it and we keep our intelligence going
Okay.
within the community and monitoring the activities of any such
Sure.
kind of elements that you might have within the community.
Right. Finally, Ambassador Chakrabarti, there's already, within the community itself, there's a lot of voices against what ISIS is doing. I mean, a vast majority of the people are against what ISIS is doing. But, ISIS has its sympathizers, as Air Marshal was saying, all across the different parts of the world. And Libya, Yemen, Afghanistan, Egypt, Nigeria, Pakistan, areas of great concern. And I mean, Pakistan is our neighbor. How important and how should we be looking at that?
I think the physical part is not so important. I think today radicalization is taking place through the social media, through the internet.
Yes.
And that is what is happening. And we have already had some cases in India of the most unlikely people
Right.
who've been radicalized and have been helping the IS or doing some propaganda. They've not been fighting as such.
Sure.
This was not a physical battle that they did, but it was a battle of the minds.
Right.
And that's what has happened. And that cannot be stopped. And they will continue to do that because they have found this to be a very, very useful tool for recruitment.
Sure.
So that is going to continue, and we must be extremely alert, and our
Okay.
intelligence has to monitor all this.
Yes.
And keep listening.
Right. One final word from you, Ambassador Sinha. How can this be portrayed as a war which is not against Islam?
That's very important. And we have to explain to people that the ISIS has killed very few non-Muslims. Most of the people that has killed have been Muslims of different sects.
Okay.
So that has to be brought home to the common people who don't really understand. The ISIS would like this to become a war of Muslims versus the rest of the world.
Crusaders,
And
for
then
example.
anybody who has any kind of grievance against any non-Muslim should be then attracted towards the IS. But the efforts of all governments should be to explain the reality of this organization
Right.
to the people.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on Late Edition. Well, the US-led coalition has been bombing Islamic State for more than a year. Russia joined the conflict in September, but the US was wary of its role in hitting foreign-backed fighters that were battling Bashar al-Assad and not the Islamic State. Now, President Hollande says that France will intensify its assaults on Islamic State, and he would meet US President Barack Obama and the Russian President Vladimir Putin in the coming days to urge them to pool their resources. Now, the French Interior Minister has said that police have arrested nearly 24 people. They've seized arms, including a rocket launcher and automatic weapons, in 168 raids. And they've said that these actions are just the beginning. And Hollande has said that he would create 5,000 new jobs in the security forces. He will boost prison service staff by 2,500 personnel. And he will avoid cuts on defense spending until 2019. France, as he said earlier, is at war. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.